At what point did the stakes rise for you with making films where you had money that was given to you and it became more serious, and then it became more stressful at times because now you're responsible for more? And how did you handle that?
I think that one of the movies that happened for me on was a movie I did called Demon's Kiss, which was, it was the biggest budget I'd had till that point. I'd probably directed 5 or 6 movies till that point. And Demon's Kiss was a bigger budget. It was shot on film. That's right off the bat, that's puts you in another bracket economically, you know. And it was a longer schedule, and it was just a bigger film. And it was the first film I was making for this particular company. And and also it was a script that it was a concept I had pitched to the investor, which I should point out that a lot of the films that were made back then, especially horror films and exploitation films and stuff, sometimes someone would just come to you, or they come to the producer you're working with and say, we want to make this movie, X movie, and are you in or you out? They already had a title, they already had artwork, they'd already done pre-sales in Milan or something, and it was your choice whether you wanted to be involved in the movie or not. Demon's Kiss was something I pitched. I had the title, the concept, and I pitched it, and it got the green light. So, and I was writing it and directing it. So it was very important to me, not only to handle the production well and come in on budget and but to make a good movie that I'd be happy with too, because I was actually getting more resources to do it with. That was one of the films, I think, for sure, that I was, and it wasn't, I can't say I had fun making that movie. I mean, I've made movies. What I a lot of times say is the movies I've had the most fun making, they didn't turn out as well, or they didn't do as well. Some of the ones that have been nightmares to make, they're like some of my most successful films. I don't know why exactly that is sometimes, because I work hard on everything I direct, but it just turns out that way sometimes. Demon's Kiss was a really hard movie to make. It wasn't a huge hit necessarily, but it wasn't, didn't disappear either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. But I just remember every day on that, talking about a different location every day. I had 2 DPs. I had a DP who was forced on the production, who was more or less trying to take over the movie. I had to take him aside early on and tell him that that's not going to happen, that's not going to work. And after that, he was fine. But that was something I had to contend with on the first day of shooting.
Wow.
There was a lot of nudity in the film. It was an erotic thriller. And it was the most of those type of scenes I've ever had to direct at that point. So thankfully the actors were really cool and professional and all that, but that was kind of a challenge for me too. And I just the post-production was also very challenging, let's just say, in terms of the movie I saw it being versus what the executive producer saw it as being. But yeah, that was probably one of the first times I remember feeling, and I just gotten married too. So it was like, and it was the first movie I made after I got married, and we'd been prepping it for a long time. So, the more prep you have, sometimes the more psyched out you can get. That's why I don't like to have too much prep on a film. I like to have some, but not too much, because then after a while you can start to psych yourself out a bit.
That's really interesting. The ones that didn't turn out the best actually were the most fun, and then vice versa. That's fascinating.
It's weird. I mean, like, for example, I mentioned this movie Death Factory that I had in Blockbuster, my first movie in Blockbuster. Okay, that was a nightmare to make that movie. We're shooting in a location that didn't have running water and barely had electricity. There were no bathrooms, and it was interior, and it was in the dead of summer, super hot, and we were like bringing in fans, but it wasn't enough. It was a haunted attraction, like a closed down haunted attraction that we were shooting in that was closed for the summer. But it was just it was ridiculous. And there was a lot of effects, there was a lot of gore, everyone was getting covered in blood, sticky blood, and our days would always go longer and longer. And, it was one of those shoots where you start off with normal days, and then by like day 5 or 6, you're starting at like 5 p.m., And it was really tough to make, but that ended up being one of my most well-known successful movies. I will say when we were making it, I had a feeling about it that it would do well, and it would turn out well. actually. I don't know if it would do well. I knew it would turn out well because I just could see what I was seeing on screen. I could see in the monitor and on set, I could tell that it was delivering. It was the kind of movie I'd like to see, that I would be happy with it if I rented it. That's like my gauge a lot of times, most of the time is I want to see a film. I want to make a film that I'd like to see and that I'd be happy with as a jaded horror fan, So, yeah.
Does one start out a jaded horror fan, or it builds after?
It builds because I interact a lot with like fans and stuff, and there's like fans of different generations who like some of my older movies and stuff, and there's like just starting out, and it's funny because like it's fun almost to see somebody get excited about some 80s slasher that you've seen like 20 times or you've seen 10 times, and you're like, yeah, whatever, what's the big deal about that? But well, it is a big deal to them now because they're just discovering it. But you do get, once you see more and more stuff, you do get jaded, yeah. And then you've made movies too, on top of it, you really get, it's hard to maintain the kind of enthusiasm and the, the excitement about new release horror, sometimes.
Right, we all, I'm coming here, whatever age, always say, well, I'm not going to end up like that, like sort of dream crusher or whatever, and then I think enough things happen and you don't mean to do it. And I'm not saying that's how you are. I'm just saying, but we all have to like check ourselves because it's like so easy to be jaded about whatever it is.
I saw a lot of that too when I first moved here. I saw it from guys who were in their 40s.
Right.
When I was in my early 20s or getting to my mid 20s, I saw from guys in their 40s who were super jaded, and I thought they had the best jobs in the world. And I'm like, what are you complaining about? What's your problem? And, of course, there are levels to all of these things that people, if you don't really know them, you don't know the whole story.
Sure.
But I mean, just having said that, just as a general statement, I think it's very, very important to keep your enthusiasm about what you're doing and your gratefulness for what you've been able to accomplish, because, it's very, very hard to make any movie, any type of movie, any budget movie, whatever. It's very, very difficult. And anyone who does that, I mean, that's an accomplishment right there. And there's, if you've been lucky enough to make a few, and then some of those have actually gone out and have fans and people that like your stuff and they appreciate what you've done, that's, you should be very appreciative of that, I think. I don't think you should ever lose your appreciation for that or your love of the game. And it's really hard to it's really easy to lose your love of the game because this is a very difficult game to be in. It's probably easier to maintain your love of cinema than it is the business of cinema, but you can't have one without the other, so.
Yeah, that's true. I know sometimes I think if you dip your toe back into what you don't want, then you have a new appreciation for kind of like what you have a little bit. Because you can.
I think it's very easy to see the glass half empty. I think we're, as humans, are engineered that way no matter what we're doing, what field we're in. But I see it sometimes from other filmmakers that seem like they're not my peers who have also some very cool accomplishments, but they always seem to focus on the thing that they didn't get. The store that their movie didn't get into, the festival they didn't get into, the money they didn't make, the this, that. And I'm thinking, you can choose to see it that way, but there's so many other good things that have happened for your film that you ought to be happy with. And sometimes that's something that Josephine and I talk about is, let's always be grateful and thrilled for the stuff that goes right and the stuff that works and the people that approach us about doing cool things with the movie, because you should be appreciative of that stuff. And there's a lot of people out there doing it, and there are more people now than when I started making all kinds of movies. So you do have to you have to train yourself to see it half full, I think, because there's a lot of negativity, but you just don't want to let that be your go-to reaction,
Right, and I like what you said about there's a difference between the love of cinema and then the love for the business, but sometimes the love of cinema can reignite it.
It does. I mean, like we watch movies, regularly, and all different types of movies, new movies, old things that we haven't seen. Sometimes we watch something that we just both love, and like we both love Paul Schrader films. And like when we first met, we first started talking about Paul Schrader, and I thought there was this cool girl that knows who Paul Schrader is, and she's in Romania, and she loves Paul Schrader movies. And because most people, like when I was in film school, most people were only interested in Kevin Smith and Tarantino. They didn't care about Bob Fosse, Schrader, Friedkin, any of these guys. So, and I was more interested in that type of stuff. So we'll just sometimes watch something that we really love, that we know it's good, and then you discover another layer of it usually, because these are great films. They hold up for, repeat viewings, and you discover another layer, whether it's the sound or the photography or a performance or something. So yeah, you need to renew your love for movies that way, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and when all else goes wrong, just
yeah, it's absolutely.
Sometimes,
Reminds you of why you're doing this, why you're putting yourself through this, and because otherwise, why am I this torture that I'm torturing myself here? Why? Well, it's something you're aspiring to, and it's also a world that you want to contribute to, and that's what we're doing this, because we want to contribute to film, to the not to sound pretentious, but the art of cinema or the history of film or whatever you want to call it.
So instead of must love dogs, must love Paul Schrader.
Right, exactly. That would be a prerequisite. Must be a fan of American Gigolo and cat people.